When a newborn puppy growled louder than a grown dog, they thought it was just a fluke. But as weeks passed, the truth became terrifying. Why was this puppy growing faster, thinking deeper, and protecting harder than any dog they'd ever known? And what if he wasn't supposed to exist at all? The spring air in Cedar Hill, Oregon carried a scent of pine and wildflowers, stirred gently by a breeze weaving through the open hills and low-lying clouds. This was a town where time moved slower, where neighbors knew each other by name, and where the rhythm of the seasons mattered more than the tick of a clock. On the edge of the town's eastern ridge stood an old farmhouse wrapped in ivy and warmed by the golden hue of the setting sun. It was there that Grace and Matt Foster awaited the arrival of new life. Grace Foster, a gentle soul in her early 30s, stood barefoot in the kitchen, her auburn curls tied back in a messy knot. Her warm brown eyes carried the tiredness of a woman who loved deeply, who'd planted flower beds with her hands and mended shirts without complaint. Her husband, Matt Foster, tall and broad-shouldered, was a man of quiet patience. A former Marine-turned-high school teacher, he wore the countryside in his bones. His beard was neatly trimmed, his jeans faded at the knees, and his hands bore the faint calluses of a man who worked with both books and fences. Their golden retriever, Ruby, was curled in a soft birthing box in the living room, its wooden frame built by Matt with quiet care. At 5 years old, Ruby was more than a pet, she was their protector, their comforter during the quiet months after Grace's miscarriage, and Ellie's sleeping pillow during thunderstorms. Her coat glowed amber under the lamp, her eyes soft with trust, though now clouded with the strain of labor. Grace knelt beside her, whispering soothing words as she stroked Ruby's flank. Outside, the storm clouds loomed but hadn't yet broken. Thunder rumbled faintly, more a whisper than a threat. Matt adjusted the thermostat and returned to Ruby's side, checking the towels, ensuring the temperature stayed steady. Both had prepared for this night for months, reading manuals, watching videos, and speaking with Dr. Avery Morgan, the town's kind-hearted vet. The first puppy arrived just after sundown, a squirming, wet miracle wrapped in soft whimpers. Then came the second, third, and fourth, each a golden copy of Ruby, healthy and hungry. Grace wiped her tears, overwhelmed with joy. Matt kissed her temple and laughed softly as the little ones scrambled for warmth. The fifth was a bit smaller but still vigorous. Ruby cleaned each one lovingly, nudging them toward her belly. The room was filled with the soft sounds of new life, suckling, yawning, the rustle of straw and cotton. Then Ruby strained again, her body taut with tension. Grace's smile faded. "Matt," she said. He was already by Ruby's side. The final birth was taking longer. Ruby whimpered softly, her paws twitching. And then, at last, the sixth puppy emerged. The room fell silent. He was enormous, nearly twice the size of his siblings. His fur was darker than Ruby's, already showing a strange bronze tint beneath the wetness, with subtle silvery streaks along his spine. But it was his eyes that stunned them, already open, glowing a deep, ancient amber. He locked eyes with Grace immediately, and for a fleeting moment, she felt as if something beyond language passed between them. "This one's different," Matt murmured, kneeling. Grace reached out slowly, wrapping the pup in a towel. "He feels solid," she whispered. "So aware." They named him Atlas. It was a name Matt had once joked about for a future Great Dane, a name too grand, until now. Atlas squirmed, not like a newborn, but with purpose. He pushed aside his siblings gently but decisively to find a spot near Ruby's belly. Ruby, though clearly exhausted, accepted him without hesitation, licking his ear with slow affection. That night, as the other pups slept in a pile of golden fuzz, Atlas lay slightly apart. His eyes remained open. Watching. Across the fence, sipping his nightly chamomile tea, an old man noticed the strange behavior. Harold Benton, retired geneticist and the Fosters' neighbor, leaned on the rail of his deck. His gray hair was thick, combed neatly, and his glasses large and always slightly askew. He was a man of quiet solitude, tending his roses and reading old journals from a career he rarely spoke of. He had lived in Cedar Hill for over 40 years, and his limp, souvenir from a lab accident in 1987, kept him close to home. Tonight, he saw something he hadn't expected. Through the slats of his fence, he caught a glimpse of a single puppy, walking. Not waddling or stumbling like the rest, but walking, with a steady gait and muscle control no days-old pup should possess. Harold lowered his cup. His eyes narrowed. He watched as the pup sat, tall and poised, gazing directly into the night as if guarding something invisible. "That's not right," he muttered. He made a mental note to speak with Grace soon. The next morning, the sun painted the hills in hues of orange and rose. Grace hung baby blankets and small towels on the line, her heart full. Matt was inside recording notes about the pup's behavior. Atlas was again slightly apart from the others, observing. As she looked up, she noticed him sitting at the edge of the porch, facing Harold's yard. Still. Still as a statue. Harold, dressed in a cardigan and holding his gardening gloves, paused when he caught the puppy's gaze. It wasn't playful. It wasn't curious. It was intentional. And Harold, a man who had once worked on top-secret genome enhancement protocols, felt a cold flicker of recognition stir in the back of his mind. For the first time in years, he felt something like fear. The fog rolled in gently over the hills of Cedar Hill, Oregon, curling around the evergreens and resting in the pastures like a ghost reluctant to leave. The spring sun, slow to rise, filtered through the mist in golden streaks, casting a pale light across the wooden porch of the Foster farmhouse. Morning dew clung to the grass like pearls, and a distant rooster cried into the hush of dawn. Inside, the Foster home stirred to life, but quietly, as if in reverence to something unspoken. It had been 3 weeks since Ruby gave birth. The 5 golden puppies she bore first had grown quickly, playful, plump, with eyes full of mischief. They scrambled and tumbled across the living room rug, their small bodies soft with fluff, their tails wagging with innocent joy. But Atlas was different. From the beginning, he had been more than merely bigger. He was silent in a way that felt deliberate. His bark was rare, his movements calculated. He watched more than he played, always sitting slightly apart, his amber eyes never missing a detail. At 4 weeks old, he was already nearly the size of a full-grown spaniel. His coat was no longer damp bronze, it had darkened into a rich, lion-like gold, streaked faintly with silver across the shoulders, giving him a regal, almost mythic appearance. Grace Foster, now attuned to his every habit, stood by the kitchen counter, pouring coffee into her favorite mug, the one with chipped edges and a fading wildflower print. Her eyes were shadowed with tiredness, not from lack of sleep, but from the gnawing weight of confusion. She was a woman who believed in patterns, in comfort, in the natural rhythm of things. But Atlas didn't follow those rhythms. She had seen him, just days ago, push open the latch to the screen door, a latch that even the older puppies wouldn't dare attempt. And it hadn't been a random pawing, it had been a precise press of the lever with his nose, followed by a backward nudge. She hadn't said anything to Matt, not yet. It felt too strange, too much like a scene from a film she wouldn't believe if she weren't living it. Matt Foster, seated at the table in his worn flannel shirt, was flipping through a notebook where he recorded the puppy's growth metrics. His brow furrowed as he jotted down the latest weights. Atlas now outweighed the others by more than double. "He's healthy," Matt said, mostly to reassure himself. "Just, gifted, maybe. Strong genes." Grace didn't answer. She watched Atlas through the kitchen doorway, where he sat calmly beside the window, observing the sun rise through the mist. Not panting, not fidgeting, just watching. Upstairs, their daughter Ellie stirred in her bedroom. Ellie Foster, only 10 years old, was small for her age, with a pale face framed by long, straight brown hair she rarely allowed to be brushed. Ever since the accident last summer, the one that took her younger brother, Noah, she had become withdrawn, her laughter dried up like a forgotten well. She spoke little. She rarely smiled. Her grief had taken root deep in her, wrapping around her days like ivy choking stone. For months, she had refused to come downstairs for breakfast, had flinched when touched, and avoided eye contact with everyone but Ruby. But that had begun to change. The first smile had come when Atlas, only a week old, had crawled onto her lap during one of her silent vigils by Ruby's side. The puppy hadn't yipped or licked her face like the others. He had simply curled beside her, resting his head on her thigh and letting out a soft, warm breath. Ellie hadn't moved, but her hand had, almost involuntarily, stroked his back once. Then again. A day later, she spoke to him. Not a full sentence, just a whisper, "Hi." But it was the first word she had said in nearly 2 months. Since then, wherever Ellie went, Atlas followed. She would sit with him for hours, murmuring to him in hushed tones that even Grace couldn't hear through the cracked door. She began to eat dinner with her parents again. And once, as she fed Atlas a spoonful of mashed pumpkin, she laughed. Really laughed. It hadn't gone unnoticed. Grace found herself torn between hope and fear. Her daughter was returning to her, but through a puppy that seemed more human than dog. One afternoon, as she folded laundry in the hallway, she watched Ellie sit cross-legged with Atlas by the stairs. Ellie was reading aloud, something from an old book of Norse myths. Atlas, impossibly still, seemed to listen, head tilted, eyes focused. When she turned the page, he shifted slightly forward. When she paused, so did he. Grace had to step away, her hands shaking. One evening, after tucking Ellie into bed, Grace crept back downstairs and found Atlas in the hallway. The screen door was ajar, though she swore she had latched it. Atlas stood in front of it but had not gone outside. He was staring into the dark yard, unmoving. His ears twitched, his breathing slow. "Did you open that?" she whispered. Atlas turned to look at her, and in the silence that followed, she felt seen, not as a human sees a dog, but as one sentient being regards another. Her knees almost buckled. Later that week, Grace decided to confide in someone. Not Matt, not yet. She walked across the pasture to the weathered white fence where Harold Benton, the old man next door, was watering his rose bushes. Harold was a retired biogeneticist in his 70s, with a perpetual furrow in his brow and a crooked gait from an old leg injury. His eyes, though tired, still flickered with an analytical sharpness that could slice through pretense like a scalpel. "He's not normal," Grace said softly, arms crossed, her gaze lowered. "Atlas. He understands things." Harold didn't laugh. He didn't shrug or scoff like she feared he might. Instead, he asked, "Has he looked you in the eyes yet? Held it? Like he was waiting for you to blink?" She blinked then. "Yes," she whispered. Harold said nothing for a while. The water from the hose dripped slowly to the soil. Then he told her to let him know if Atlas ever tried to climb stairs before the others did. "If he starts bypassing fear," he added, "then we'll talk more." And with that, he turned back to his roses. Days passed. Then weeks. The other puppies barked, nipped, wrestled over a chewed sock. Atlas remained calm, quiet, only joining when invited, and even then, with restraint. One morning, Ellie opened the back door for him, and instead of bounding out, he stepped aside and let the others go first. Grace stood in the kitchen, coffee forgotten in her hand. Atlas had made a choice. By the 5th week, the siblings were still wobbling on thick paws, while Atlas moved with a quiet grace, his steps measured and balanced. He had begun watching the shadows near the tree line in the evening. Always still. Always listening. The first cold breath of summer had arrived early in Cedar Hill. Though the days were still warm, the nights were beginning to hold the edge of something less forgiving. Mist clung to the treetops, heavy and motionless, while the forest surrounding the town stood hushed as if listening for something. Grace Foster woke to find dew thick on the windows and a sense of unease pressing on her chest before her feet even touched the floor. It began with the trees. 3 days earlier, a hiker named Colton Reeves had come into town looking pale and short of breath. Colton, a lean man in his 40s with sun-damaged skin and a heavy camera bag always slung across his shoulder, was known in Cedar Hill for his nature photography. Quiet and observant, Colton preferred birds and clouds to people, but when he stumbled into the coffee shop that Tuesday morning, even the barista noticed something was wrong. His hands trembled as he sipped his drink. Then he pulled out his phone and showed the bartender a photograph, a pine tree torn open down the middle, claw marks as thick as broom handles raked across its trunk, sap still glistening like blood in the dawn light. Harold Benton heard about it first, as he always did. The old man still had friends in strange places, botanists, rangers, and a retired bioweapons specialist who now grew tomatoes in Arizona. When Harold asked for the exact coordinates of the photo, his breath caught. The tree stood less than a half-mile from the Foster property, along a trail Atlas had begun wandering near, always under watch, always curious. That same night, Matt found a similar mark behind the chicken coop. He had gone to close up the fencing when his flashlight flicked across something on the bark of a cedar tree. At first, he thought it was old rot. But when he got closer, the shape was unmistakable, for deep, curved gouges spiraling up the trunk, too wide for any coyote or dog. His stomach turned. Without saying a word, he turned off the light and went back inside. The next morning, Grace found Matt already dressed, sipping coffee he hadn't touched. He showed her the photograph he took. Her lips parted, but no sound came. In the silence, she looked toward the hallway where Atlas was sitting, watching them again with that quiet, burning focus. His head tilted slightly as if listening, his eyes sharp and calm. He blinked, then turned and walked away. That was when Matt decided to install the cameras. They placed 2 near the back fence and 1 facing the woods. Nothing extravagant, just motion-activated trail cams from the hardware store. It made Grace feel like a trespasser in her own home, but neither of them said it aloud. That night, Grace barely slept, and when she did, she dreamed of trees screaming. The next day, Harold came over, not with roses or gossip, but with something heavy wrapped in a waxed cloth. He handed it to Grace at the doorstep, his voice low. "I've been digging through old things," he said. "I think you should read this." Inside the cloth was a worn black binder labeled in fading ink, Genesis Project, Decommissioned, Class B. Grace opened it slowly, revealing yellowed pages filled with diagrams, genetic charts, and blurry photographs of animals, canines mostly, with notes scrawled in the margins. One word kept repeating, augmentation. "What is this?" she whispered. Harold leaned against the porch rail. Back in the 80s, a private research group got funding through military defense channels. Said they were breeding working dogs, smarter, faster, tougher. They started here, in Oregon. Testing pups with edited genes. But something happened. The project went dark. Files were buried. I helped review some of their sequencing work before I left the institute. Then I walked away. He looked at her, eyes clear despite their years. "I think your dog, Atlas, might be one of them." "Not directly. Maybe second generation. Maybe just a spark of something they never meant to pass on." Grace gripped the binder tighter. "But he's not dangerous. He's helped Ellie." She couldn't finish the sentence. Harold sighed. "Maybe he's a miracle. Or maybe he's a question that hasn't been answered yet." That night, Matt reviewed the camera footage. Most clips were normal, wind shaking branches, squirrels hopping the fence, Ruby checking the perimeter. But at 2:41 a.m., the west camera captured something else, Atlas walking the fence line alone, head low, body still and tense. He paused suddenly, turned his head toward the trees, then looked directly into the camera. Not at it. Into it. His eyes caught the infrared light, glowing faintly. And then he stepped out of frame. The next clip, from the southern tree cam, was just 7 minutes later. It showed Atlas sitting beside the old tree where Matt had found the claw marks. But this time, the tree was whole. Intact. No damage. Matt rewound. Rewatched. Then realized, the clawed tree from before was on the eastern edge. This one was different. There were more trees. He didn't sleep after that. The next day, Matt and Grace didn't tell Ellie. They didn't mention the binder. But they watched Atlas more carefully. Ellie, for her part, had begun to draw again, pictures of wolves, suns, moons, and always, at the center, a large golden dog standing between shadows and light. One morning, she placed a drawing on the fridge. It showed Atlas sitting on a hill, stars above his head, with glowing lines in his chest, like runes or circuits. "I think he protects the sky," she said simply, then skipped outside to feed the puppies. Grace looked at Matt. Matt looked at Harold's binder. The claw marks were getting closer. It was a Saturday, warm and still, the kind of late spring day when the breeze felt gentle enough to forget the warnings of the woods. The trees surrounding Cedar Hill stood tall and silent, their new leaves flickering in patterns of light and shadow. At the Foster property, the air smelled of fresh-cut grass and pine, with the distant hum of bees dancing across wildflowers. Ellie Foster, now more herself than she had been in months, had wandered toward the edge of the woods with a sketchbook clutched tightly under one arm, her bare feet light on the grass. Ellie was 10 years old, small and lean with a quiet way of moving, as if afraid to disturb the world around her. Her long brown hair was tied loosely with a red ribbon, and her shorts were smeared with watercolor paint from the morning's drawing session. Ever since Atlas had arrived, she had begun venturing farther from the house, still within her parents' line of sight, until today. Today, Grace had left her pruning shears to take a phone call, and Matt had gone inside for a glass of lemonade. By the time they noticed the silence, Ellie had vanished. Panic came fast. "Ellie!" Grace's voice cracked as she ran past the porch steps, her eyes scanning the open fields. Matt rushed from the house, already heading for the tree-line, heart pounding. She wouldn't have gone far, he said, more to convince himself. But Ruby barked once, a sharp, warning sound, and that was when they noticed Atlas wasn't in sight either. In the woods, Ellie had been chasing a butterfly, its wings a burst of orange and black, dancing just beyond reach. She had stepped over mossy roots and into a shaded gully she didn't recognize, her sketchbook clutched tighter as the air grew cooler. She turned to retrace her steps but realized she could no longer see the house. The woods, once gentle, now whispered with strange sounds. Her breathing quickened. She called for Atlas, once, then again. A low growl echoed from somewhere nearby. She froze. It wasn't a dog's growl. From behind a fallen log, a lithe shape emerged, dark fur, sleek muscles, eyes bright with hunger. A mountain lion. It stepped slowly, almost lazily, but with the deadly grace of a predator sure of its prey. Ellie backed away, tears welling in her eyes. Her voice caught in her throat as she screamed. And then, he arrived. Atlas burst through the underbrush with a force that seemed to shake the earth itself. His body, now nearly the size of a wolf, moved with impossible speed. In the blink of an eye, he placed himself between Ellie and the cougar, fur bristling, lips curled, emitting a growl that was not loud but deep, subterranean, ancient, vibrating the air around them. The mountain lion hissed, tail lashing. It made a half-step forward. Atlas didn't wait. He launched with precision, every muscle acting in terrifying unity. The fight was a blur. Claws slashed, jaws snapped. Atlas dodged with an intelligence that defied instinct, moving not like a pet, but like a trained combatant. In seconds, the cougar retreated, yowling, vanishing into the trees, leaving only broken twigs and silence in its wake. Ellie collapsed to her knees, shaking. Atlas turned, his eyes soft again, licking her hand as if to say, "It's over." When Matt and Grace arrived moments later, breathless, desperate, they found Atlas standing over Ellie, unmoving, his body tense but unharmed. Ellie sobbed into her mother's arms. "He saved me," she whispered. "He saved me." Later that night, as Ellie slept curled beside Ruby and her brothers, Matt reviewed the camera footage again. The Southern Trail cam had caught it all. From the moment Ellie crossed the fence line to the final growl that sent the predator fleeing. But it was Atlas who drew the most scrutiny. Grace watched the clip in silence. Atlas moved with speed that didn't seem possible. Not just fast, calculated. Like someone who had been trained for moments exactly like this. Grace sent the footage to Dr. Avery Morgan. Dr. Morgan was a woman in her mid-40s, with streaks of gray in her short, wind-blown hair and a no-nonsense demeanor that came from 20 years as both veterinarian and former Army bioadvisor. She was lean, sharp-eyed, always in boots and jeans, with sleeves rolled up past her elbows like she was never more than a breath away from surgery. She had always liked the Fosters, but Grace's email had been marked urgent, and the video was more than unusual. She watched it 4 times before responding. Her reply was brief: "Come see me tomorrow. Bring all the footage you have. And tell me everything about Ruby." That night, Grace sat by the window long after everyone had gone to sleep. Atlas lay at the edge of the porch, eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight, his breath steady. She remembered when he was born, those strange amber eyes already open, already knowing. Now, they glinted in the dark like they were watching not just the woods, but time itself. Grace touched her phone, opened the binder Harold had given her again. Her finger hovered over a phrase written in faded pencil: Series 3L, Enhanced Response Canines. Below it, a note in smaller print: rejection rate, 91%. Surviving subjects display hyperprotective behaviors, strategic movement, silent communication patterns. She looked back toward Atlas. Hyperprotective. Strategic. Silent. "Who are you?" she whispered. Atlas did not move. He didn't need to. It started with a sound. Low, guttural, and impossible to place. Not quite a growl. Not wind. Not owl. A few neighbors heard it first, mostly those who lived along the edge of the woods bordering the Foster property. Then came the claw marks. 3 wide slashes across a metal feed shed. A broken garden fence. Deep indentations in flower beds that no ordinary dog, or known animal, could have made. It didn't take long before the whispers began to spread through Cedar Hill, growing louder with each morning. Grace noticed the change at the grocery store. Mrs. Hanley, who usually greeted her with a warm hug and a bag of lemon scones, barely met her eyes. Mr. Preston at the gas station asked how the beasts were doing in a tone that didn't attempt to hide the sarcasm. When Matt passed the community bulletin board, he saw a flyer: "Protect Our Neighborhood, meeting this Sunday at the town hall." Below it, someone had scribbled in pen: "The Fosters need to answer some questions." Sunday came fast. The Cedar Hill Town Hall was a modest, cedar-paneled building with peeling green shutters and folding chairs stacked in the corner. That night, every one of those chairs was filled. More people stood against the back wall, arms crossed, expressions tight with suspicion. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, and the scent of pine floor cleaner hung in the air like a warning. Matt sat beside Grace near the front, their hands locked together, palms damp. Ellie was at home with Harold, who had insisted she shouldn't hear what the town might say. Atlas remained by the porch, sleeping, though everyone knew his ears missed nothing. Sheriff Nolan stepped up to the podium first. A broad-shouldered man in his late 50s with silver hair and a deep, creased brow, Nolan had been in Cedar Hill longer than most. Fair, level-headed, known for keeping order without theatrics. But even his voice was strained. "We've received multiple reports of damage, claw marks, broken fences, unsettling sounds at night. Some of you are scared. And I get it." He paused, then glanced at Grace and Matt. "We're investigating. But let's stick to facts." From the third row, a woman stood, tall, angular, with tightly curled gray hair and a face like polished stone. Marilyn Doyle, retired school principal, known for her blunt words and unshakable belief in order, cleared her throat. "What I want to know," she said loudly, "is what that thing living next door actually is. It doesn't bark. It doesn't run like a dog. I've seen it jump the Foster's fence without effort." Whispers erupted. Someone murmured, "It's a mutt. A wild breed." Another added, "I saw it watching the school bus." Grace stood, her voice soft but clear. "Atlas has never hurt anyone. He saved our daughter's life." More murmurs. Then, from the back, a boy's voice spoke up. "He saved me, too." All eyes turned as Trevor Matson, a freckled boy of 11 with scruffy blonde hair and knees perpetually scraped from summer adventures, stepped forward. He clutched the microphone awkwardly. "I didn't like Atlas at first. He's big. Kinda scary. But I fell into the dry well behind my dad's tool shed last week. I yelled for 10 minutes. Then Atlas showed up." His voice wavered. "He pulled me out. By himself. Just grabbed my jacket and backed up until I was free. He looked at the crowd. You can ask my dad. He saw it happen." In the crowd, Trevor's father, a stocky man in a plaid shirt and ball cap, nodded solemnly. The room fell quiet. Sheriff Nolan cleared his throat again. "We've also received camera footage," he said carefully. "From the Fosters. Including an incident where Atlas defended their daughter from a wild predator." Gasps followed. One woman crossed herself. Another leaned forward, muttering, "That's not natural." Matt spoke this time. "He's not a threat. He's aware. We don't understand him entirely, but he's protected us, not harmed us." Then, for the first time, someone else stood up in defense. Sarah Caldwell, a middle-aged librarian with gentle eyes, round glasses, and a reputation for believing in second chances. She had once fostered aggressive dogs others gave up on. "Maybe he's different," she said calmly, "but different isn't evil. If a child had those abilities, we'd call them gifted, not dangerous." The room rippled with discomfort, but some heads nodded. Still, pressure mounted. Later that night, after the meeting dispersed in uneasy silence, Grace and Matt walked home under a pale moon. They didn't speak. At the porch, Atlas stood to greet them, his head brushing against Grace's hand as if sensing the weight she carried. Matt turned to her. "This won't go away, Grace. It's only getting louder." She nodded, then looked out toward the trees. "Then we protect him the way he's protected us." The clouds hung low over Cedar Hill, casting a pewter haze across the hills and fields. Rain drizzled steadily, drumming gently on the rooftops and blurring the edges of the world. Inside Dr. Avery Morgan's clinic, the storm outside was nothing compared to the one forming within the walls of her office. The room was lined with charts, dog anatomy models, and faded photographs from her years in service, a younger Avery in fatigues, standing beside Belgian Malinois at a desert outpost. But now her hands trembled slightly as she flipped through the printouts on her desk. Grace Foster sat across from her, silent but alert. Her cardigan was damp at the shoulders from the walk through the rain, her face pale but determined. She had brought with her a manila folder wrapped tightly in plastic. It was Harold Benton's final contribution, a collection of hand-drawn schematics, stamped documents, and one page marked, "Property of the Genesis Initiative, Restricted Access." Dr. Morgan adjusted her glasses, leaned forward, and spread out the papers like a battlefield map. She pointed to a DNA sequence printed beside a blurry photo of a newborn puppy, eerily similar to Atlas. "These are synthetic insertions," she said. "Not mutations. They were placed there artificially. This isn't evolution, this is design." Grace stared at the photo. "And Ruby?" Morgan nodded grimly. "She's from a bloodline that was part of the initial breeding stock. According to this, she tapped one of Harold's older diagrams. They used golden retrievers as a base for certain lines due to their natural intelligence and emotional intuition. What they didn't anticipate was that the genes might remain dormant, until Atlas. Grace took a breath. So he's, what? A mistake? Morgan shook her head. No. He's a result. Possibly the only successful result of the Genesis project. A fully integrated genetic prototype. And now we know he exists. As if summoned by the weight of the truth, the door creaked and Harold Benton entered, leaning heavily on his cane. He looked smaller today, hunched under a worn trench coat, his eyes darker than usual. You told her, he asked Morgan, his voice like worn gravel. Morgan nodded. Harold sat with a sigh, removing his coat with care. I didn't want it to come to this. He looked at Grace. I helped design the behavioral controls. Not the enhancements, those were others. I thought we were building something to help rescue teams, not warfare. When I realized what they were planning, what they wanted dogs to become, I walked away. Grace's voice was a whisper. And now they're coming back. Harold opened another envelope from his coat pocket. Inside were 2 photographs, black SUVs parked outside a facility in Montana, and a memo dated only last week, subject, canine anomaly detected in Oregon. Possible lineage traced to Project Genesis Line 3L, recommend recovery protocol pending verification. Morgan swore under her breath. They're watching. Grace's heart thundered. They know about Atlas. Harold hesitated. Not yet. But they will. If any more footage leaks. If one more child tells a story at school. They have ears everywhere. Morgan leaned back. This isn't a local matter anymore. It's federal. Outside, the rain intensified. Thunder rolled in the distance, as if the world itself was shifting. Later that night, Grace sat on her porch, holding a copy of the Genesis papers under her sweater. Across the yard, Atlas lay beneath the oak tree, his golden coat darkened by rain but his posture regal and unshaken. Ellie sat beside him, her rain boots soaked through, talking to him in hushed tones as she brushed his ears with the gentleness of someone who had lost too much to ever take comfort for granted. From the side gate, Harold appeared again, moving slowly under the weight of his past. He handed Grace a flash drive. This is everything I have left, he said. They'll come looking for me eventually. I've made peace with that. But you need to make sure they don't take him. Grace held the drive tightly. What do I do? Harold's eyes were tired. You disappear. But it was already too late. Across the county, a signal had been received. Somewhere in a concrete building 2 states away, a man in a black suit picked up a red phone. On a monitor before him, Atlas's face stared back through camera footage collected from the town hall meeting. An algorithm had flagged it for anomaly. And the word stamped in bold across the bottom of the report was simple: locate. Retrieve. Neutralize if necessary. The morning broke cold and tense over Cedar Hill. Mist blanketed the trees like a curtain pulled tight over something the town was never meant to see. Grace stood on the porch in a long gray coat, a mug of untouched coffee clutched in her hands. Her eyes stayed fixed on the tree line, not blinking, not moving. Behind her, the house was still. Too still. The kind of silence that grows when everyone is holding their breath. Inside, Matt paced the living room. His face was hard, unshaven, his movements sharp with restrained energy. On the table in front of him were 2 maps, one marked with a thick red circle over a small region in Montana. It's called Dunridge Wildlife Refuge, he muttered. Private land, no federal oversight, no drone access, no roads unless someone shows you the way. Grace said nothing. Matt looked up. It's the only place left. We can't fight this anymore. We have to get him out. The night before, Dr. Morgan had returned, this time not in her usual boots and jeans but a dark blazer over a utility vest and a thick leather folder under her arm. Her face was pale, her jaw clenched tight. She had spent the last 48 hours digging through every declassified document she could find, cross-referencing Atlas's gene data, and preparing one last desperate strategy. "They're coming," she told them flatly. "I've intercepted a movement order. Not soldiers, contractors. Private. Black vans, unmarked weapons. They're not here to observe." Matt had asked the question no one wanted to say aloud. "Will they hurt him?" Dr. Morgan's reply was quiet. "If they think he's a threat, yes." At that moment, Harold, sitting by the window with a worn revolver on his lap, had spoken. "Then they'll have to come through me." But Harold was 73, and they all knew the truth. The next morning, just after sunrise, the vans arrived. 2 of them. Matte black, no plates, their engines almost silent. They pulled up to the edge of the Foster property and stopped. The birds stopped singing. The wind stilled. The trees themselves seemed to hold their breath. 6 men emerged, dressed in tactical gear. Helmets, vests, rifles with strange attachments. Not military issued, these were tools for capture, not combat. Their leader, a tall man with a clean-shaven face and unnaturally still eyes, stepped forward. His badge read V. Thorne, but there was no agency logo. His voice, when he spoke, was devoid of warmth. "We're here for the asset." Matt stepped forward, hands open. "He's not an asset. He's our family." Thorne didn't blink. "Stand aside." Inside the house, Atlas stood near the fireplace, unmoving. Ellie clung to his neck, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. She had woken before the knock. Maybe she'd felt it coming in her dreams. She didn't speak. She didn't cry out. She simply held on. Grace entered quietly. "Ellie, honey. You have to come with me now." But Ellie shook her head. "No. He saved me. Now it's my turn." Then, without waiting for anyone's permission, she stepped out the front door. The soldiers froze. Atlas followed behind her, slow, calm, regal. His golden coat shimmered in the morning haze, and his eyes were locked on the man with the badge. Thorne raised his hand. "Move, girl. This doesn't concern you." Ellie stepped in front of Atlas and spread her arms. "He's not dangerous. He's good. He protects people. You just don't understand." Thorne's finger twitched on the grip of his rifle. "This is your final warning." Before the tension could break, a car screeched into the gravel drive. Dr. Morgan leapt out before it fully stopped, papers in hand, her voice sharp as lightning. "Stand down. You're operating outside legal bounds." Thorne turned slowly. "You have no jurisdiction." Dr. Morgan pulled a thick document from her folder. According to Executive Order 11872, all research tied to Project Genesis was classified as illegal under Section 4 of the Bioethics Oversight Act. Any living subject is to be treated as protected property until full congressional review. She handed over the paper. Thorne scanned it, his expression unreadable. Then his earpiece crackled. He turned away, muttering something low. After a moment, he gave a subtle nod. "Orders received," he said coldly. Then, to his men, "Stand down." Without another word, the group turned, returned to their vans, and vanished as quickly as they had come. The family stood in silence. Later that night, under the stars, Matt unpacked a duffel bag and loaded the truck with supplies. Atlas stood nearby, watching the road. Grace knelt beside him. "We're taking you somewhere safe. Somewhere you can be free." Ellie approached, eyes red from tears but shining with understanding. She hugged Atlas tight, burying her face in his neck. "Don't forget me." Atlas licked her cheek, his tail thudding once against the ground. At dawn, the truck pulled away from the house. Grace sat in the back with Atlas, her hand resting on his shoulder. Matt drove in silence, the Montana map folded on the dashboard. The road ahead was long, uncertain, but at least now, they had chosen it. The road to Montana unfolded like a ribbon of quiet redemption, stretching between towering pine forests and valleys dusted with snow. It took them nearly 2 days to reach the sanctuary, 2 days of silence, whispered memories, and glances exchanged in the rearview mirror where Atlas lay calmly in the truck bed, his golden eyes flickering between sleep and vigilance. Dunridge Wildlife Refuge was nestled deep in a basin surrounded by low mountains and wild meadows. The entrance was simple, a hand-painted wooden sign and a cattle gate manned by an older man in a canvas jacket and wide-brimmed hat. Nathan Kepler, the refuge director, had a weathered face, sun-creased and solid, with sharp green eyes and a slow, steady manner of speech. A former ranger and animal behaviorist, he had retired from public work after a fallout with federal oversight over unethical animal testing. Now, he oversaw Dunridge like a shepherd guarding the last flock of unclaimed souls. He greeted the Fosters with a nod and a handshake that said more than words ever could. "He'll be safe here," Nathan said, eyeing Atlas with an almost reverent curiosity. "He can roam, but we'll monitor him. If he wants solitude, we give him space. If he wants company, we introduce it slowly." Atlas stepped down from the truck without needing to be called. He moved like a creature who had seen too much for his age, graceful, aware, and accepting. He sniffed the air, turned to look at Ellie, then walked ahead toward the open field. Grace fought tears but didn't cry. Matt stood behind her, an arm around her shoulder, his jaw clenched tight with love and powerlessness. Ellie knelt down, dirt pressing into her knees, and whispered, "I'll be back. Every summer. I promise." Atlas turned his head once more before continuing on, his frame glowing in the golden light as he disappeared into the tall grass. It was not the farewell of a pet. It was the parting of equals. Back in Cedar Hill, the world moved on. A week later, Grace received an envelope postmarked Washington, D.C. Inside was a formal letter from the Department of Wildlife and Genetic Ethics, confirming that legislation, the Sentient Companion Protection Act, had passed preliminary stages. The act would prevent unauthorized genetic manipulation and guarantee protections for advanced animals like Atlas. At the bottom, in neat black ink, were 2 names credited for their contribution, Dr. Avery Morgan and Dr. Harold Benton. Dr. Morgan had gone back to her clinic, quietly, though her office now included a new bookshelf labeled Whistleblowers and Wild Hearts. Harold, for his part, had taken to long walks and chess at the park. When asked about the Genesis project, he would say only, "We failed at trying to make protectors. One of them made himself." Time softened the sharpest edges. The seasons turned. Spring into summer. Summer into memory. A year passed. The foster home felt quieter without Atlas, but not emptier. Life resumed its rhythms, Ellie returned to school, Matt began woodworking again, Grace planted tomatoes along the fence. Ruby grew older, her muzzle grayer, but her spirit as gentle as ever. The other puppies had all found homes, except one, the smallest, named Milo, who stayed with Ellie and followed her like a shadow, a soft golden echo of the brother he never quite understood. That July, true to her word, Ellie returned to Dunridge. Now 11, taller and more confident, she wore boots dusted with road dirt and carried a sketchbook packed with drawings of dreams. Nathan met her at the gate, smiled his quiet smile, and gestured toward the western pasture. "He comes at dusk," he said. "Every day." She waited. The sky turned the color of fire and apricots. Shadows stretched across the hills. And then, from between the trees, he emerged. Atlas. Larger now, his chest broader, his coat shimmering in the dying light. But his eyes, those deep, understanding eyes, were unchanged. He approached slowly, deliberately, and when Ellie stepped forward, he bowed his head and pressed it into her hands. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. She sat with him until the stars came out. At one point, she opened her sketchbook and showed him a picture, a girl and a dog standing side by side, facing a great unknown. Atlas sniffed at once, then laid his head in her lap. They stayed that way, the quiet folding around them, until Nathan came to call her back. As she turned to leave, Ellie whispered, "I kept my promise." Atlas watched her go. And just before she disappeared into the twilight, he let out one single, low, soft sound, a mixture between a howl and a sigh. A farewell. A thank you. A promise of his own. Sometimes, the ones we're meant to protect are sent to protect us. Atlas wasn't just a dog. He was a reminder that even in a world built on fear, control, and doubt, God can still send miracles in the form of gentle protectors wrapped in golden fur. He came into the lives of the Foster family not to bring danger, but to bring healing, to mend a broken girl's heart, to show a fractured community what love looks like when it stands tall in silence, and to remind us that no matter how different something may seem, it can still be made in God's image, meant for something greater. In a world that often forgets the quiet, divine miracles walking beside us, may this story be a reminder. Some angels have 4 legs and never speak a word, yet they carry the grace of heaven in every step. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who believes in second chances. Leave a comment to tell us what you think, subscribe for more stories that stir the soul, and above all, may God bless you and your loved ones. Comment, Amen, if you believe that God still sends miracles when we need them most.